The photograph came to me through unusual circumstances. A woman named Margaret Ashford contacted me after finding my website, where I offer restoration and analysis services for historical photographs. She'd inherited a collection of family images after her grandmother's death, and one particular photograph had been troubling her for weeks. "There's something wrong with it," she'd written in her email. "I can't explain what, but every time I look at it, I feel uneasy. My grandmother kept it hidden in the back of a drawer, wrapped in black cloth. I need to know why." The photograph arrived carefully packaged. When I unwrapped it, I found a formal family portrait from around 1910, mounted on thick cardboard backing typical of the era. The image showed a family of three: a man, a woman, and a young girl, posed in an elegant Victorian parlour. The room was richly decorated, with floral wallpaper, a carved mantelpiece displaying photographs and decorative objects, an oil lamp, and fine furniture. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard studio portrait. The family was well dressed, in the formal fashion of the period. The man in a dark three-piece suit with a striped tie. The woman in a high-necked striped blouse with elaborate detailing. And the girl in a white lace dress with a large bow in her hair. But as I examined the photograph more closely, I understood why Margaret had felt uneasy. None of them were looking at the camera. And, more unsettlingly, none of them were looking in the same direction. The father stared to his left, his eyes wide and fixed on something beyond the frame. The mother gazed to her right, her expression rigid and strange. And the little girl looked straight ahead, but not at the camera. She appeared to be staring at something between herself and the photographer. Something at eye level, something that held her attention completely. Their expressions were what made it truly disturbing. This wasn't the typical stiffness of Victorian portraiture. These were faces frozen in what looked like shock or fear. The father's mouth was slightly open. The mother's jaw was clenched. The girl's eyes were so wide they showed white all around the irises. And they were absolutely motionless, caught in that strange, trance-like state, each looking at something different, each seeing something that had captured their complete attention. I scanned the photograph at high resolution and began my analysis. The image quality was excellent, clearly taken by a professional photographer with good equipment. The exposure was even, the focus sharp, the composition carefully arranged. Everything suggested this was a formal studio portrait, except for the expressions. And the fact that no one was looking at the camera. I called Margaret. "Can you tell me anything about the people in this photograph? Who they were? What happened to them?" "That's my great-grandfather, Robert Morrison, his wife Helen, and their daughter, Alice. The photograph was taken in their home in Philadelphia in May 1910. Alice was 8 years old." She paused. "She died 2 weeks after this photograph was taken." My skin prickled. How did she die? That's the thing. No one in the family ever talked about it. My grandmother, Alice's younger sister, born after this photograph was taken, said the subject was forbidden. But she found documents after her own mother died. Alice's death certificate listed the cause as accidental drowning. But the circumstances were never explained. I looked at the little girl's face in the photograph. Those wide, staring eyes. That expression of frozen attention. "What happened to the parents?" I asked. Robert Morrison had what they called a nervous breakdown shortly after Alice's death. He was institutionalized for several months. Helen became a recluse. They had another daughter, my grandmother, in 1911. But the family apparently never recovered from whatever happened. Robert died in 1923. The death certificate listed heart failure, but family letters suggest he took his own life. I examined the photograph again, this time paying attention to what might be outside the frame. What were they looking at? What had captured their attention so completely that all three had turned away from the camera, each in a different direction, each with that expression of shock or horror? I enhanced different sections of the image, looking for clues. The mantelpiece held several framed photographs and decorative objects. I zoomed in on these, wondering if they might provide context. One of the framed photographs on the mantel showed what appeared to be a young boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old. The image was slightly out of focus, but I could make out his features. Serious, solemn, dressed in the formal clothing of the era. I called Margaret back. Was there another child in the family? An older brother? Her silence told me I'd found something. How did you know? There's a photograph on the mantelpiece. A boy. That would be William. He died in 1908, 2 years before this photograph was taken. He drowned in the Schuylkill River. He was 10 years old. 2 years before Alice drowned. Both children dead in the water. I kept researching, digging through newspaper archives and public records. I found William Morrison's death notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer from June 1908. Tragedy struck the Morrison family yesterday when their son William, age 10, drowned while swimming in the Schuylkill River with friends. Despite efforts to rescue him, the boy's body was not recovered until several hours later. The family is devastated by this terrible loss. And I found Alice Morrison's death notice from May 1910. The Morrison family has suffered another terrible loss. Alice Morrison, age 8, drowned yesterday in circumstances that remain unclear. The tragedy occurred in the family home. Authorities are investigating, but have ruled the death accidental. Alice was the daughter of Robert and Helen Morrison, and the younger sister of William Morrison, who drowned 2 years ago. Alice had drowned in the family home, not in a river or a pool, but inside the house itself. I searched for more details but found none. The investigation, if there had been one, had left no public record. Whatever had happened to Alice Morrison had been quietly buried. I examined the photograph again with this new information. A family that had already lost one child to drowning. A photograph taken 2 weeks before they would lose another child, the same way. And in the image, all 3 family members, staring in different directions, with expressions of shock, as though they were seeing something that terrified them. I enhanced the background of the photograph, examining the wallpaper and the shadows. Victorian portrait photographers sometimes used mirrors or reflective surfaces as part of their compositions. I wondered if there might be a reflection visible somewhere in the image that would explain what the family was looking at. I found it in the oil lamp on the right side of the mantelpiece. The curved glass of the lamp's reservoir acted as a convex mirror, distorting but still reflecting the room. And in that reflection, barely visible, but unmistakable once I'd enhanced it, was a 4th figure. A boy standing between the family and the camera, standing exactly where the little girl appeared to be looking. The figure was indistinct, blurred, barely more than a suggestion.
but the general shape and size matched the photograph of William Morrison on the mantelpiece. A boy of about 10, standing in the family's parlor 2 years after he'd drowned in the Schuylkill River, standing there during a formal family portrait.
Visible in the lamp's reflection, but apparently not visible to the photographer. Drawing the attention of all 3 family members, pulling their gaze away from the camera, manifesting so completely that none of them could look away. I zoomed in on each family member's face again, trying to read their expressions with this new understanding. The father looked shocked, disbelieving. The mother looked rigid, with some emotion I couldn't identify. Fear, hope, desperate longing. And the little girl looked transfixed, staring at the figure with wide, unblinking eyes, as though she recognized him, as though she knew who he was, as though she knew what he wanted. I found one more piece of evidence in Margaret's grandmother's papers, a letter written by Helen Morrison to her sister, dated June 1910, a month after Alice's death. I cannot speak of what happened. The authorities believe it was an accident, that Alice somehow fell into the bathtub and drowned while I was downstairs. But I know the truth. Alice had been seeing William. She told me so several times in the weeks before her death. She said he came to her room at night, that he wanted her to play with him, that he was lonely. I thought it was childish imagination, grief manifesting as fantasy. I told her William was gone, that he couldn't come back, that she mustn't think such things. But I was wrong. He did come back, and he wanted his sister with him. The day we had our photograph made, we all saw him, standing there in the parlor, as real as life, as real as any of us. Robert saw him. I saw him. And Alice saw him most clearly of all. The photographer never noticed. He was fussing with his equipment, preparing the plates. But we saw him. William, our boy, returned to us. I should have known then what it meant. I should have kept Alice away from water, should have watched her every moment. But I didn't understand until it was too late. William came back for her, and she went to him willingly, following him into the water as she'd followed him in life when he was alive. They found her in the bathtub, drowned. But there was water everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, as though the tub had overflowed or something had splashed out. The authorities couldn't explain it, but I know what happened. William pulled her under. William took her with him. Robert hasn't spoken since. He sits in his chair and stares at nothing. I think he's waiting. I think he knows William will come back for us too. The water always calls for the next one. The drowning never ends. I don't know how long I can bear this. Every night I hear water running somewhere in the house, though all the taps are closed. Every night I dream of William and Alice together, beneath dark water, calling for us to join them. I wake each morning surprised to still be alive. Surprised the water hasn't claimed me yet. But it will. I know it will. The photograph proves it. We were already marked, even as we sat for our portrait. We were already looking at death. We were already seeing the ghost that would take our daughter. And we couldn't look away. I sat back from my desk, feeling cold. Helen Morrison had known what the photograph showed. She'd seen her dead son standing in the parlor during the portrait session. She'd watched as all 3 family members turned to look at him, unable to resist, unable to maintain the formal pose the photographer had arranged. And 2 weeks later, Alice had drowned in the bathtub, following her brother into the water, joining him in death. Robert Morrison had lived another 13 years before ending his own life. Helen had survived until 1935. But according to family records, she had become increasingly obsessed with water, checking taps constantly, refusing to bathe, panicking during rainstorms. She'd been found several times standing in the bathroom where Alice had died, staring at the empty tub. The photograph had been wrapped in black cloth and hidden in a drawer. Hidden because it showed the truth. Hidden because it captured the moment when the family saw death standing in their parlor, drawing their daughter toward the water that would drown her. I prepared a detailed report for Margaret, including all my findings and the enhanced images showing the figure in the lamp's reflection. I explained what her great-great-grandmother, Helen, had written about seeing William in the parlor that day. Margaret called me after receiving the report. "So the photograph shows a ghost? My great-great-uncle William, who drowned 2 years earlier, standing in the room during the portrait?" "That's what the evidence suggests. The figure in the reflection appears to match William, and your great-great-grandmother's letter confirms that all 3 family members saw him during the portrait session." "And 2 weeks later, Alice drowned, following him into death?" "Yes." Margaret was quiet for a long time. "My grandmother told me something once, when she was very old and not entirely lucid. She said water had always frightened her, even though she'd never had a bad experience with it. She said it was because of her brother and sister, though she'd never known them. William died before she was born, and Alice died when their mother was pregnant with her. She said she'd always felt like the water was waiting for her, that it wanted to finish what it started with her family." Did she die of natural causes?" "Yes. Heart failure at age 93. But she'd lived her entire life refusing to swim, refusing to take baths, only showers and brief ones. She wouldn't go near bodies of water. Lakes, rivers, even decorative fountains made her anxious. The curse, if that's what it was, seemed to have broken with Margaret's grandmother. Or perhaps her fear of water had protected her, keeping her away from the element that had claimed her siblings. I asked Margaret what she wanted to do with the photograph. She said she would keep it, but properly stored and documented. It's part of the family history. A terrible part, but history nonetheless. Other people should know what happened to them, what the photograph captured. The image now resides in Margaret's care, along with the documentation I provided. She's donated copies to a museum that studies paranormal photography, where it's become part of a collection exploring unexplained Victorian spirit photographs. But unlike most supposed spirit photographs from that era, obvious fakes created through double exposure or other tricks, this image was never intended to capture anything supernatural. It was meant to be a formal family portrait. The ghost appeared anyway, visible in the reflection, drawing the family's attention so completely that none of them could maintain their pose. None of them could look away from death standing in their parlor. Everyone looking in different directions. Because there was only one ghost, but 3 people seeing him from 3 different angles. The father seeing him from the left, the mother seeing him from the right, the daughter seeing him straight on, looking directly at her dead brother, who'd come back to take her with him. The photograph doesn't lie. It shows exactly what was there on that day, in May 1910. A family already marked by tragedy, about to be destroyed by another. A dead boy standing in his own parlor, visible to his family, but not to the photographer. And a little girl, staring at her brother with those wide, transfixed eyes, already half claimed by the water that would drown her 2 weeks later. The portrait that should have been ordinary, but couldn't be, because death was already in the room, already calling, already pulling Alice Morrison toward the bathtub, where she would drown, following her brother into the dark water that had taken him 2 years before. They're all gone now. Robert, Helen, Alice, William. The house in Philadelphia where this photograph was taken was torn down in the 1960s. The parlor, with its floral wallpaper and ornate mantelpiece, exists only in this image. But the photograph remains. 3 people, looking in 3 different directions, each seeing the same ghost from a different angle, each unable to look away from what they knew was coming, each already drowning, even as they sat for their portrait in a dry parlor on a spring day in 1910. The water was already there, invisible to the camera, invisible to the photographer, but present nonetheless, already claiming them, already pulling them under. Everyone looking in different directions because they were already surrounded. Because death had come from all sides. Because the ghost was everywhere and nowhere, reflected in a lamp, but standing in the center of the room, visible to the family, but invisible to the lens. Until you look closely, until you enhance the reflection, until you see what they saw. The boy who drowned in 1908, come back for his sister in 1910, standing between the family and the camera, drawing all their attention, marking them for the water. The photograph captured it all. And now, more than a century later, we can see it too, if we look closely enough, if we know where to look, if we're willing to see what the family saw that day in their parlor, when they posed for what should have been an ordinary portrait, but became instead a record of the moment when the dead reached out for the living, when the water called, and everyone looked away from the camera to watch death come for them in 3 different directions, all seeing the same terrible truth.